When growth stalls, most leaders reach for surface fixes like new campaigns, a sharper sales deck, even new hires. But the real issues are often deeper, such as misaligned systems, broken handoffs, or unreliable data. That's why we built the Growth Readiness Score. In just 5 minutes, you'll get a clear score across 4 critical areas of your revenue operations and see how you stack up against your peers with benchmark data. Tap the link in the show notes to get started. It's quick, insightful, and often reveals issues leaders don't expect.
If your franchisees are making money, your validations are going to improve, your compliance is going to get easier, your franchise sales are going to get stronger, and your royalty growth is going to become healthier.
You're listening to RevOps Champions, a podcast created for B2B leaders to help you align your people, streamline your processes, trust your data, and leverage technology in order to grow your business. Hello and welcome back. Today I'm joined by Keith Gerson, founder and CEO of Gerson Advisory Services and one of the franchise industry's most respected strategic advisors. Keith brings more than 50 years of experience helping franchise systems improve growth, operations, and franchisee performance. Throughout his career, Keith has served as a franchisor, franchisee, executive, and advisor, holding leadership roles with organizations including Fran Connect, Puro Clean, Mrs. Fields, and Jack in the Box. Having worked with more than 500 franchise brands, he brings a rare perspective on what truly separates high-performing franchise systems from those that struggle to scale, which of course is what we like to talk about here on the show. What makes Keith's perspective especially valuable is his belief that sustainable growth isn't driven by technology alone. It comes from aligned leadership, disciplined processes, meaningful data, effective coaching, and a relentless focus on franchisee success. Today, through Gerson Advisory Services, he helps franchisors uncover operational blind spots, improve franchisee performance, strengthen sales effectiveness, and leverage AI to become more productive without losing the human element that drives lasting results. Keith, welcome to the RevOps Champions podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's not often that we get to speak to someone who has 50 years in franchising, but I'm so happy to have you here today, Keith. So
thank you so much.
Overall, over these sort of 5 decades, you've worked with over 500 franchise brands in various shapes and forms. Looking across all that experience, what consistently separates franchise systems that outperform everyone else?
That's a great question. Actually, the amount of brands that I've had the opportunity to work with and through is in excess of 1,500 through my role as president of Fran Connect prior to starting Gerson Advisory Services. So even though I may not have worked directly with every single one of the executives of those organizations, I had the opportunity to study all of the data, all of the best practices, because arguably Fran Connect had more data when it came to what was actually happening in franchise systems than any organization out there. So it really was a wake-up call. And in my 50 plus years of being in franchising, the one thing that I have found consistent is the very best systems out here had tried and tested their franchise systems prior to going live. They focused exclusively on franchise unit profitability, which had a tendency to really uplift the system in terms of the buy-in and the trust that was created on behalf of the organization. And the best systems really were focused less on data and more on the actionable insights that could be created through that data. They're all great communicators, and that's just a handful of things that I've observed in franchise systems. But at the end of the day, you got to assume that the franchise system is built to scale. If not, you could be the world's greatest jockey, but if you're saddled to a broken down horse, you're not going to win any races.
Yeah. When you and I spoke before, it was interesting how, I guess it's not shocking, but it was reassuring that the framework that we use when we're building revenue operation systems for franchises and multi-location businesses, our pillars are people, process, data, and technology. And technology is last very, very purposely, and people is first very, very deliberately. So when we spoke, we immediately aligned on that idea that technology isn't the solution, it's the last step. Why do you think so many organizations still try to solve operational problems, in other words, process and people related problems with software before fixing the people and process and the data issues?
That's a powerful question. One of the things that I believe is happening is a lot of the decisions are being made sitting in front of a laptop computer instead of CEOs and the executive team being in the field where the action is. The fact is in doing data analysis, I have found that the frequency of which franchisors are literally in the field has broken down to maybe once to twice a year, which is not frequent enough. The span of control used to be about 10 to 1 for systems that were working on unit level profitability, and a 30 to 1 ratio of a franchise business consultant or coach to a franchisee's overall 30. Now, again, that number is running between, I'd like to say 50 or 100 to 1. But again, that frequency in which the CEO is in the field has really, really fallen in most systems.
Yeah. And of course, if it's not the CEO, then there should be someone else who's really doing that, right? Because obviously the CEO of a 150 or a 500 unit, franchise network or even bigger, they're going to need to delegate some of that, but still have that relationship with the franchisees.
Yeah, absolutely. I coined this phrase, and it's a odd phrase, but the fish stinks from the head down. So I just think that people are starting in the wrong place, and they're starting with tools and not focused on what decision are we trying to make better. And again, at the end of the day, the bottom line is it's franchisees first, and then growth follows.
I like that. And of course, I like that particular analogy even more because I used to be in the commercial fishing industry, so I'm very familiar with how fish rot and how they smell. Keith, so you've said that the franchisee's P&L is the franchisor's report card. How should franchisors rethink leadership and support in franchisee profitability, where that becomes truly the North Star?
I believe that what's happening out there is, again, people are analyzing data in offices instead of actually being on site to witness what's happening and to get to the bottom. If you were to look at where training and development is occurring within the franchise disclosure document, that which everybody can see, is you're going to have the table of contents of what's being taught the day that the franchisee becomes a part of the system. And what I'm finding, though, is when the franchisors are not focusing in on the training and effective development of their franchise business coaches, the people that are in front of these franchisees, they don't know how to resolve the challenges and issues that they're finding, because all of the training, and I've done a lot of research on this and a lot of surveys, the franchise business consultants are not being trained on how to coach for improved franchisee performance. They know what the standards are, they know how to enforce standards, but they don't know how to effectively manage and follow up. And so what I believe in breaking this down to a very easy 3-point thing, it's like parent effectiveness training. The franchisor has to have just a few important compass points, the North Star that basically changes performance. Keep it simple, just like in training your children. Have just a few things you're focused on, talk about them all the time, and make sure that your behaviors are in alignment with those rules or those standards. And I just don't see that happening because, again, we're not effectively training our coaches on how to do strategic field visits, how to effectively have coaching discussions with their franchisees that is sustainable, especially since we're not seeing them with any real rigor or certainty. Again, maybe it's just a weekly call that someone has with them. But again, you got to be there. You got to observe it, and you have to be able to ask the right questions at the right time. And most importantly, you got to get the words to come out of your franchisee's mouth, because you're not going to change behaviors until the franchisee agrees that they have a problem and are committed to coming up with solutions on how to solve those problems.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of like, we're all familiar with the phrase, hope is not a strategy. So as you're growing and you have an FBC or in emerging brands where the CEO is still having that face time with 25 to 30 franchisees, and then eventually as they get to 80 or 100 or 120 units, they're hoping that problems don't occur because they're not able to have conversations with more franchisees. But of course, we all know that that's eventually just a matter of time before some franchisees start struggling and they're not being heard, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's this flywheel, though. And I'm going to break it down simply though. If your franchisees are making money, your validations are going to improve, your compliance is going to get easier, your franchise sales are going to get stronger, and your royalty growth is going to become healthier. So
Right.
I think it's really important to ask every department, because this is not just going to fall on the shoulders of a singular franchise business consultant working with, let's say, 30 franchisees. The
Right.
question really is, how do you ask every department, how does your work improve franchisee performance?
Yeah.
So it literally is this village, and everybody plays a role here. So I didn't want to say through my comments on coaching for improved franchisee performance again, that's solely on the FBC.
Sure. Okay, so let's start backtracking again then from before we get to the FDD. The FBCs are the ones who are really holding the baby at the end of the day because they're being stretched too thin, and even the FBCs in large part have the best intentions and they care more about their franchisees than anybody. In fact, we've met some where their franchisees are their family. They send their kids gifts on their birthdays and they really, really care about their franchisees. But when they've gone from having 30 franchisees to having 80 franchisees that they are sort of responsible to coach and consult to, that obviously becomes impossible. So even with the best intentions, you believe that most FBCs are trained to inspect rather than coach, right? What's the difference, and why does coaching create stronger franchisee performance than auditing?
As a franchisee, these are not our employees. These are capable people, or we wouldn't have allowed them into the system for the most part. We get our surprises every now. But, the solution that they are mostly willing to follow, the goals that they're willing to take on, have to be their own. It
Mm-hmm.
can't be what the franchisor wants for them. It has to be what they want for themselves. And so I think one of the most important steps to take is in the franchise sales process, the relationship is actually built with the franchise development person. And they're picking up all of these notes and all of these cues. They know their strengths, they know their weaknesses. But unfortunately, there's not a protocol in place, a system for being able to pick up what these learnings are and what the motivation was for why somebody became a franchisee in the first place, to remind them during those tough times. And I think that's contributing to this challenge. But again, at the end of the day, we have to coach to what it is that is going to help the franchisee achieve their growth. And you can't want it more than them. I had a franchisee in a system that I was the president of. And this gentleman in his first year in a system that was only averaging about 550,000 did 750,000 in his first year, 1.2 million in his second year. And by the time he got to his third year, he was knocking at $3 million. And he told me that he'd never been so miserable in his life,
Mm-hmm.
because really this was a lifestyle business that was going to allow him to, not being somebody's employee, if you will, take those vacations on a quarterly basis with his wife and son, which meant everything to him.
Mm-hmm.
Now he was saddled to a brand in which he was working 7 days a week. And frankly, when he got to that third year, he said, I'm making more money than I ever thought I would make in my life. And I've never been more unhappy. I'd like to sell. I'd like to get out of the system.
Yeah. And
So, and
you,
here, what were we doing? We were coaching them and, hey, saying, let's keep going. You still have so much more runway. But that's not what he wanted.
yeah. So it's really being clear on their goals, which of course is what a lot of, the best brokers in the industry are, the ones who can help, these new franchisees identify what success looks like for them apart from the financial piece, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So, okay, so we've talked about, where these issues can show up, and you touched on, the fran dev person is typically where the relationship starts with a new franchisee. And then when it is successful, then the FBC takes over that relationship. But you've gone really deep on the importance of FDDs. And I think anybody in the franchise space understands the importance of the FDDs. And you've identified that the FDD is a massive blind spot, and in fact is where so many deals are lost, and Fran Dev doesn't even really know why or how. Why do you think that is?
There are many paths this is going to potentially take us down. The FDD really is the most powerful and transparent document that gives you the opportunity to really understand and compare your brand to that of your direct competitors, to understand what they're doing that perhaps you're not doing, and vice versa. It's a treasure trove of best practices. Part of my service is I offer franchise disclosure document competitive analysis and strategy reports in which I'm looking at the total addressable market. I'm looking at all of the other metrics, but I'm looking at some metrics that franchisors are not really paying very close attention to. The SBA failure rates in concert with litigation, in concert with closures that can be found within the document, et cetera, are all very, very telltale and almost always are going to lead back to the selections of franchisees that were made and the focus that's made or not made when it comes to the financial side of the business. So I have completed, for example, a study. I took 87 different franchise brands in 12 different sectors, and I did an analysis of each and every one of these brands in these sectors. And I have found out that every top tier brand made all three systems that I'm about to talk about. And there was no brand that was in the top tier that was missing one or more of these decisions. So if I may, the royalty architecture is really, really important. And what I'm finding in terms of best practices is that a tiered, not a flat, rewards growth instead of a taxing maturity. And so to that end, decision one, you need to have tiered structures that reward growth instead of flat rates that punish your best operators. The second decision has to do with item 19 disclosure. And we're talking about real earnings transparency, not that the minimum that their franchisors are going to sign off on. And that builds trust as well. So 100% of top tier brands are doing full disclosures. I'm not saying down to EBITDA, but they are sharing, if you will, the controllable margins, some of the fixed costs and different things. And the third decision that I found here is that the top franchisors out of these 87 brands was a multi-unit development and a formal program that's built before scaling single unit sales. And let me explain again, in reading the FDDs and looking at training and development, again, that's that section of the franchise disclosure document, which is going to say, here's how many hours you're going to have in classroom, here's how many hours you're going to have at the unit level, and here's additional readings. But I have never found a brand that would actually expand what they do to train multi-unit development. Because that's a very different skill than running a single unit. So you need a formal program, again, built before you scale single unit sales, not after. And none of these cost much. Two of them cost almost nothing. And so the other one is just basically arithmetic. So I do have a report that I'm going to be publishing here shortly entitled Franchise Outperformance is Designed, Not Discovered. And happy to make that available. I'm not charging for this. It's just pure thought leadership.
Yeah, that'd be great. We'll definitely want to add that to the show notes once you have that available. Yeah. So going back to the third piece there of the multi-unit development, Keith. So that seems somewhat counterintuitive because whenever you're speaking to sort of high growth, franchisors, it seems that what most of them are looking for is multi-unit owners. So why do you think they want multi-unit owners, but they're onboarding their franchisees really to be single unit owners?
Plain and simply, I just think that they don't necessarily know any better. They may themselves not have had experience, or perhaps they're not opening up and asking the multi-unit franchisees within their system to share what that is that they believe that they need. But I can tell you, in my experience, the most dissatisfaction that I have witnessed is not for the least profitable franchisees in the system. It's the most accomplished within the system, typically your multi-unit developers. And I think what's going on here is that, again, I think it's not a matter of apathy, but I just don't think everybody has a tendency more or less to follow the leader. Like when I do these FDD analysis studies, I found such a close, it's almost like whoever defines the category, everybody seems to want to get as strikingly close to what that system is doing. But if you were to do an analysis on a McDonald's and you want to know how to scale a system, you don't look at what McDonald's is doing today. You go back in time and look at what McDonald's was doing back in the other day. So again, these are services that I'm frequently called upon to provide, which is to develop and give multi-unit training programs. And so the three that seem to be most in demand that I run into are going to be coaching for improved franchisee performance. Again, the training and development of not just the franchise business consultants, but there's additional roles as a brand is scaling, as a multi-unit is scaling. You know, if they've got 5, 10, 20, the things they have to do and the inflection points in which they have to bring them in are different. But I do want to go back and make one point, which is when we were talking about the most successful franchisees, and I was implying that they are sometimes the most frustrated. And I've heard this time and time again. We have more locations. This is the tail wagging the dog. Many of these multi-unit franchisees are actually making more money at bottom line than the franchisors that they're with, because it's not fractional. They are keeping 94% of their revenues, whereas the franchisor perhaps is taking 6% out of that. So I believe that what we need to do is we need to assemble, if you will, an advisory council made up of multi-unit franchisees to determine exactly what it is that they want. Because again, these guys are saying we're paying you more money than anybody else is, and yet you're giving us the least amount of attention. And mostly it's because they may want stuff like training and development on 6-session planning. And that's not something necessarily that's being taught to single unit franchisees.
Sure.
So, find out what it is, work on developing those programs. If you don't, there's many great folks out there that can help with the development, professional development of these types of learnings. I hope I answered that question.
Yeah. Well, I think to your point, there's a lot here to unpack. What I like about the way you think about it, which is not that different to how we think about it, is like you got to focus on the most important things first, which is the people and the relationships, because we often hear about the fact that the franchise and sort of the network is incentivized differently to the franchisees. Right? Which is why unit level economics are so critical, because if the franchisees are not successful, therefore, if you don't know how they measure their success, which is not just profitability, revenue and profitability, it's getting what they signed up for, which is more control of their life, to spend more time with the people that are most important to them. They're kind of a self-managing business. Those are the things that seems to be a disconnect between Fran Dev's incentives are and what the franchisee's incentives are. So yeah, it's complicated. But I think if you say, well, let's align the people, figure out the processes to make sure that we're aligning those people, how each of those people or parties is measuring their success. And then finally, we'll bring in the technology, and we're talking more and more about AI, but how to bring in technology, whether that includes AI or not, and automation to drive those measurements, those processes, and support those people.
Yeah, I agree with what you said entirely. I also want to add, though, that we're expecting too much if we think our franchise business consultants are capable of working effectively with the smallest volume franchisees and the largest. So I really believe also in tiered support. And one of the roles that you really don't hear people talking about very much is that onboarding and what happens within the first 90 days and what happens in the course of the first year. From an analysis of brands, the very best systems that I've come across basically have what's referred to as a quick start or a right start specialist or consultant, somebody that is assigned specifically to working with people that are being onboarded as franchisees into the system. And I'm talking beyond just the training and development. But that also means when you hit different inflection points, and it's no longer chucking a truck, for a home service type of a business. Now it's somebody who is an operator who's got a half a dozen vehicles that they're running, et cetera. It's very important to start talking about perhaps we need to have somebody that onboards multi-unit franchisees and stays with them to ensure that they're getting the start that they want and deserve, because it's situationally different.
Right.
So at one point it's different strokes for different folks, and then it becomes different strokes for the same folks as they get to these different inflection points.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
Yeah.
So inflection points, this comes up a lot on this show, specifically when we're talking, it doesn't matter. In every business and every industry, there are inflection points. assuming you're growing. If you're not growing, they're not going to be inflection points, because you're just going to, the inflection points are going to be related to technology, really, on how do you, if you just have the same amount of revenue, then you're focusing on how do we generate the same amount of revenue more profitably. But if you're scaling, like in the case of, most franchise brands are trying to grow, that's when inflection points, or we often refer to it as the ceilings that you will hit. And every leadership team, whether they're a leadership team for a 30 unit franchise or a 100 unit franchise or a 500 unit franchise, and of course the ones who are further along, they've seen what those inflection points are. And the anyway, so before I put words in your mouth, like what do you see are the sort of the most obvious inflection points, that when a brand goes from let's say 10 to 30 units, and then 30 to 100 units, and 100 to 300 units?
Yeah, what a wonderful question that is, and something that people don't give a lot of thought to. So when I was doing, for example, the franchise sales index report for FranConnect that I created,
Mm-hmm.
the inflection points were being broken down from one location to 75. And these are going to be either your micro emerging or your emerging brands.
Mm-hmm.
And we found from doing the analysis that royalty self sufficiency didn't occur until franchisors achieved 50 to 75 locations
Mm-hmm.
in that general range. And what I mean by royalty self sufficiency is that not being there means we are really relying upon and living on the initial franchise fee. So franchisors, I find, are not necessarily thinking as much about the quality of the franchisees that they're attracting. They're thinking more about that,
Mm-hmm.
that score of that initial franchise fee, which could bring in anywhere from $25,000 to $100,000. And I don't look at it as the FF, or initial franchise fee, as basically being the a profit center.
No.
It really, at the end of the day, shouldn't be. What we're really striving for is the long-term royalties and the long-term relationship that we're going to develop.
Mm-hmm.
So I see the next inflection point is going to be when somebody gets to the mid-market, and it could be the low end of the mid-market to the high end of the mid-market, and that was being defined as 76 locations to about 250. So unless you're looking at a platform brand that is made up of multiple franchises, you typically are looking at a system that you're trying to scale to get to the point that you now have more of a focus on the bottom line and more of the focus on the unit level economics of the franchisee. And that's the important shift. So mid market is now moving away from just having to sell, because now we're saying when you get to that mid market, you no longer have to sell another franchise to be profitable.
Mm-hmm.
You can go ahead and get to more profitability through helping your franchisees find your success, and that's how their success, and that's how you find your success.
Right.
And then the third is the enterprise brands, and those were going to be the ones from 256 up to thousands of locations. And they are looking forward to, maintaining, if you will, their dominance. And the things that they're working on, a lot of it is the technology.
Mm-hmm.
It's the AI, it's the robotics, it's a desire to build their own systems, etc., because they want to try to make themselves impenetrable. But
Mm-hmm.
at every single one of these stages of growth creates different opportunities. It's like the game of rock, paper, scissors, if you're familiar. That there's a strategy that basically says if you're the 800-pound gorilla, you're the rock and you can crush the competition.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other end of the spectrum, these emerging brands could turn on a dime.
Mm-hmm.
And they were able to capitalize, and many did during the pandemic, on achieving things at a much faster rate than you could have ever envisioned prior to the pandemic. That was one of the blessings that came out of it, if we were to find one.
Right.
So I'm saying that these smaller brands, again, can be very, very effective. But in the middle, you start really understanding that differentiation is the key. If you're not Coca-Cola, where you define your category,
Mm-hmm.
or if you're not McDonald's that had defined its category, then using the QSR reference, you're Burger King.
Yes.
And that's where the flame broiling beats frying came into play back in the day, where they gave them the other one for the money. Or with Wendy's was the fresh burgers,
Mm-hmm.
opposed to burgers that are sitting under a heat lamp all day long. So
Mm-hmm.
so that's what I'm saying, that these smaller brands can actually be beneficial at the mid-market range in
Hmm.
terms of truly being able to differentiate themselves. And that's what Pepsi did. You know,
Mm.
what was it at the time? You know, the drink for a new generation,
Sure.
opposed, or driving the Cadillac versus another brand
Sure.
that your father didn't. People are
Approve of.
looking for that. So
Yeah. Yeah.
so I'm rambling here now, but I think you
No.
get the gist of what I'm saying.
Yeah, I love that as a framing of where I was going because, what we keep hearing, what I'm continuously looking for is you mentioned sort of the emerging brands. And then when you get to that sort of royalty self sufficiency between 50 and 75, and then you sort of move into the next phase of growth from 76 units to 250, I think for most brands don't actually make it to 75 units, right?
Hmm.
And many don't make it to 10, and therefore many don't make it to 30. I'm really interested in balance. I'd like to know if you have any insight here. Is the ones who didn't make it to 30, for some reason, they think that they're on their way to 100. And many of them actually don't make it to 40. There's like this interesting space between 30 and 40 where they might get to 35, 36, 37, and everything just comes to a grinding halt because they haven't figured out how to break through that glass ceiling of complexity because they're still trying to run everything with the same people, the same teams, the same systems that aren't going to get them to 100. I mean, is that something that you've seen? And what do you think is causing, they're not making the necessary changes to get from 30 to 100?
Yeah. Well, I think that this cliche couldn't be more true. What got you here doesn't get you there. And so a lot of people believe that what they were doing and what it took to get to the 30 locations is the recipe for success, and that the people that are executing those systems are capable of getting you there. But I have found that that's not the case. I think what happens is that people are saying, this is what's making us win and this is what's making us money today. And even when they get beyond that inflection point, where they're focused on, I've got to sell franchises, they believe that's the keys to the kingdom, and they're not paying and giving enough attention to the operations side of the business.
Mm-hmm.
I have seen where what healthy systems tend to have in common, and I've seen where these emerging brands get stuck. And
Mm-hmm.
I've seen the difference between growth that looks good on paper and that growth that actually holds up under pressure.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where the positive lesson for me came in. Good data gives leaders better judgment. But the harder lesson was better tools do not automatically change behavior. And
Mm-hmm.
that's really where we've got to be focusing in, is on the behavioral side of this.
Mm-hmm.
So oftentimes the franchisors, because of FOMO, fear of missing out, they tend to try to emulate what other brands are doing. So they'll roll out their dashboards and they're going to assume that franchisees would use them because that data is now available. But that's how the operators work. I created a chart once of what all the roles and responsibilities of a franchisor or a franchisee is,
Mm-hmm.
and they barely have the bandwidth to be able to take on more. And yet we think we're going to just keep throwing things at the big boys and big girls are doing. I
Right.
don't think that a franchisee is waking up in the morning excited to log into another dashboard,
Right.
because again, you look at what they're dealing with: staffing, customers, inventory, cash flow issues, local marketing, and then whatever the problem du jour is that walked in the door that day.
Mm-hmm.
So we tend to give them dashboards and say, here's your metrics. And in my studies, the franchisees who improved were not always the ones with the most sophisticated tools. They were the ones whose franchisors were using the data to start a better coaching conversation. So we're getting back to that again, because I really think that human behavior is the key to success here.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So what are we seeing? What does it mean? What are we going to change this week? What support do you need? And
Sure.
that is where technology can become valuable, as long as the human conversation is being enabled.
Yeah. So my perspective is this, and I'd like to know what yours is, that you talked about that mindset of what got us here isn't going to get us there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And from my perspective, as simple as it sounds, it seems to me that leadership teams who have that one simple philosophy, they've already won half the battle. In other words, they're 50% of the way there because they have the right mindset. They know that what got them here, the people, the processes, the whatever, is not going to get them to where they're going. Just having that mindset, I've seen it with some incredibly successful brands on the one hand, I think they were growing too fast, but because they had that mindset of they know that things are going to break when they get to 30, when they get to 100, when they get to 300, their systems are going to break, but they're aware of that. So they're being proactive about figuring out what's going to break when. And they're starting to invest in, again, the leadership. It starts with the leadership and then creates the people to run the new processes, the new systems, so that they can continue to scale. Do you see something different?
I wouldn't say that it's different. I'd say that what I'm seeing is additive. And part of the problem is, and this comes into those inflection points, in which you realize that the avatar of who you thought you needed to recruit into your system is different than what it actually needs to be as you're moving forward.
Right.
We all have these lessons, and this is, and one of the false positives is we reward ourselves and pat ourselves as franchisors on the back, for how quickly we've been able to scale our systems. And again, we've got to sit down and basically say, what are we learning from the top quartile versus the bottom quartile? What do these top quartile performers have in common? Because that's one of the biggest changes we need to make at that point in time, is stop bringing in people that, again, it was all about being able to scale and have, more competitive advantage in markets with more franchisees that are contributing in royalties, when in fact, we probably need more people that understand that the purpose of business is making and keeping of customers at the unit level. And I want to let that sit in for a moment here.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about, if in fact the purpose of business is the making and keeping of customers, we don't just want somebody that is going to be totally reliant upon the franchisor to give them, better marketing programs and take more ownership and lead generation. We need franchisees that know how to scale. They know how to be a part of the community. They're out there in the field. They're out there looking. I'll tell you, when I was with Alpha Graphics a number of years ago, before somebody could come into training, they were required to go out in their communities. And this is a business to business franchise that's, based on printing and design work. So they would send a brand new franchisee who has not yet been trained out into the community, bringing a box of cookies or a box of donuts with them, and getting business cards, so that when they did come to training, they could literally be inputting all of these prospective customers into the database, so marketing could actually start prior to the unit even being open for business. They didn't have to have training. And I thought that was absolutely brilliant.
Right.
It really, really trained people early on to understand the importance of being a part of the community.
Yeah. Again, it just seems that there are these sort of simple, very human things that can really be so successful. And of course, then once you're scaling, then you have to put systems around them to continue to grow and scale.
Yes. May I add one more example?
Please.
A real world example here.
Absolutely.
I had the pleasure of being able to create the Mrs. Fields Cookies franchise system from its very inception. They were all company owned and operated.
Right.
So I worked directly with Debbie Fields, and Debbie was brilliant. She created something to know exactly what type of an employee needed to be hired within these locations. Initially, these were all managers that were paid by Mrs. Fields. Then they became the franchisees. And here's what she broke it down to behaviorally. Again, simple system. When she would interview somebody, she created a process called singing, selling, and sampling. So the singing is, she would interview somebody and say, I'm feeling kind of bad today, I have a birthday and no one has said happy birthday to me. It would mean the world to me if you would go ahead and sing happy birthday to me. And I'm telling you, 8 out of 10 people wouldn't do it. That's not the type of person that she was looking for. She wanted somebody that wasn't self-conscious, that was gregarious, that could connect with people in a mall environment where you only had literally 3 to 5 seconds of somebody walking in front of one of your stores.
Right.
So that was the singing part. Then she went to the selling part, in which she would ask them, so do you have a favorite Mrs. Fields cookie? You do, the white chunk chocolate macadamia? That's great. Now that's telling as to whether or not somebody already has a passion for the business. But more importantly, she would say, what do you really like about the white chunk macadamia, and she'd be looking for enthusiastic responses, and that people had a knowledge, but they had a reason that they could articulate. The
Mm.
third thing she said, great, we're going to cut up white chunk macadamia cookies, and I'm going to have you, and this is an interview, we're going to have you stand in front of the store and offer samples to people that are walking by. Again, the small percentage that made it to this point, you could see the difference as to who she needed, because they would stand with their backs against the wall in some cases,
Mhm.
not making eye contact with anybody and just thrusting out a tray with cookie samples on it. But the
Mhm.
people that she was looking for were the people that were like walking up to people in the mall. You got to try this. You better hold on to the counter because your knees are going to go weak. So if she had somebody that was willing to sing, could sell, and that was passionate about the product, and could go ahead and connect with people in front of the store, she knew, and that's what made that system at that point in time scale and succeed. So that's,
Yeah.
again, just simplicity,
Yeah.
something that anybody and everybody could do in their own business in their own way. So
Yeah, I love that. That's a fantastic story, Keith. So we don't have a lot of time left, but we cannot end this conversation without talking about how AI has transformed the way we're working. And I know you specifically, it transformed the way you work. You've said it's made you roughly 10 times more productive. Where have
that's
you seen AI create the greatest business value, and where do you think leaders still misunderstand its role?
That's a great question. I think a lot of people have love-hate relationship with AI, and a lot of people are doing it because, again, of that fear of missing out. They
Hmm.
haven't really figured out that AI is only as useful as the problem you're going to point it at.
Hmm.
So I do use AI a lot in my business. And part of the reason that I'm getting so much productivity is because I've taken the time to learn how to do effective prompts and to ask the right kind of questions. I
Hmm.
will feed it data into it. I don't use just one AI system. I use several different AI systems because of the capabilities that they have and which one is greater than another. You
Hmm.
know, Gemini is great in terms of creating for me marketing documentation.
Hmm.
Chat is the best overall, especially when it comes to content development.
Hmm.
And I love Claude when it comes to complex reports.
Right.
But AI is not going to save you. I've learned this. What you hope is that it's going to help you make a, this is going to sound backwards, but it may just help you make a bad decision faster. So with clients, I'm spending a lot of time on the foundation first. You
Hmm.
got to have clean data. You need consistent definitions. You have to have a clear view of what a healthy franchisee looks like. You have to know where the performance gaps are coming from. Because if your foundation's weak, it's not going to solve the problem. It's going to amplify your confusion.
Right.
So I think that there's real value for franchising when you use, for example, lead scoring is one of those areas. In terms of that could be on the consumer front. Most often I'm seeing it on the franchise sales and development front,
Hmm.
in which you're able to weight
Yeah.
the value of each of these and where and how to pay attention.
Hmm.
I think candidate qualification is really, really important.
Hmm.
And one of the most important of all, from my perspective, is franchisee performance benchmarking.
Mm.
But I would basically say to CEO, not how do you use AI, but I would ask, what decision is it that you need to make faster, better, or more consistently? And that's a better entry point. So, a couple of examples are, can we identify which candidates are more likely to become successful franchisees? Can we
Sure.
can we see those franchisees that are at risk before performance drops too far? Can we benchmark operators more intentionally? And can we reduce even, and this one is a no-brainer. Can we reduce administrative work so our people are spending more time coaching?
Correct.
So again, let me just sum that up. AI is not replacing the coaching conversation with franchisee. It's just making room for more of those conversations and to approach them in a very, very effective way. So, one of the brands I work with on multi-unit asked me to create for them how to create a strategic field visit and how to have those effective conversations based on what's found. So I think that, to sum it up, the teams that win with AI are not going to be the ones that use it to remove the human work for franchising. That should not be the goal. The
Absolutely.
ones that are going to use it to make human work more focused and more informed and more valuable, that's the play.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's almost like I was thinking back on what you were saying earlier about, inflection points, because clearly, AI, it doesn't matter where you are, whether you're at one, like 5 units, or you're at 1,000 units, or you're at 10,000 units, AI is creating an inflection point that was not sort of on the roadmap 3 or 4 years ago, right? But the process that leadership teams have to go through is the same. It's an inflection point. And are we, so one of the things that we've learned is that it starts, you have to start with having a point of view about AI. So you talked about how some people are sort of have a love-hate relationship with AI, and some people are straight out scared of it. But whatever that is, you as the leader of a franchise network, you have to have a point of view on AI, I think, for a start. And then I guess the other thing I was thinking about, you talked about differentiation really being the one of the final inflections that a scaling brand goes through. And I just wonder how many franchise brands are thinking about AI as a potential differentiator for them. Looking ahead, how do you see AI and revenue operations for franchise networks and franchise support evolving over the next couple of years? What will the highest performing franchise brands be doing differently?
I would tell, and I might have mentioned this already, so if I'm repeating myself, I think maybe it's because I think it's worth repeating. And that
Absolutely.
is, CEOs need to be asking themselves, how do we use AI? And to ask, where do we need to make those better decisions faster? But the most important thing, like I said, was not to use AI to replace the human side of franchising, that the best franchisors are going to use AI to make coaching conversations better, not to avoid having it.
Mm.
And that, I think, is the real key. So as you can see, I'm a behavioralist, and I think at the end of the day, the world is full of educated derelicts. It's not enough just to teach people how to run a franchise and how to do these things, but you need to know how to ask the right questions. You need to know how to make these conversations more worthwhile, and not bearing them in more and more data. There is no shortage of data. The
Mm-hmm.
problem is there is a lot of shortage of the question around where and how do we use this data to effectively make a change. And I have a number of clients that they bring me in because they're struggling with the fact that it's like we have these 12 best practices, but we can't get our franchisees to follow the playbooks.
Yeah.
So, so that's where I think AI can come into play very well, and
Mm-hmm.
even to the extent that you could create great pulse surveys and ask your franchisees, to define what it is. Do they know what the best practices are? Because when I used to tour with regional managers or district managers in the past, I would ask in front of them, what is the most important thing that you should be working on according to your consultant, your regional manager, et cetera,
Mm-hmm.
and what are you working on? And if there's a disparity between those two things, or if they can't articulate it, we've got that problem that I talked about, which
Mm-hmm.
again, parent effectiveness training, have just a few rules, talk about them all the time, and make sure your behaviors are in alignment. Because otherwise, you're training franchisees that this is just another program du jour, and the franchisees thinking they're going to move on. They're never going to bring it up again. And oftentimes they don't. I mean, you have to have cadence of reviews to measure the progress that's being made. And
Right.
again, not treating it in such a way. I mean, AI can really help you in terms of organizing it. I used AI to help me in terms of defining what are the best practices for conducting franchise reviews, along with just being well read and learning how to put those things into play. So I think AI can help you get more engagement and more adoption. You don't need more tools. And
Yeah.
I think I mentioned to you once, previous to this conversation, that nobody needs a reciprocal saw. Nobody needs a hole in the wall. What they want is a bookshelf.
Correct.
And these are just tools that are a means to the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really good advice. So, Keith, maybe just sort of zooming out, so away from the specifics of AI and whatever, any last words of advice you'd give a franchise brand that is still trying to scale more effectively?
Yeah, I would say at the end of the day, franchisors can't fix what they cannot see. And oftentimes within a franchise system, people are trying to find the holy grail. They're trying to hit a grand slam. And
Mm.
I think that the issue oftentimes is that it's just a series of leaks, a sales process that sounds better in the executive boardroom than it does an actual prospect. An item 19 story, and again, I'm coming back to the FDD, an item 19 story that is weaker than the franchisor realize. You're a website that creates interest but not enough confidence, a support model that's busy but not actually improving unit economics. So I think that franchisors know something is not working, but they can't quite see where the problem starts. So you got to ask the right questions of the right people. And if you don't have the answers, that's okay. First of all, most of the great answers come directly from your franchisees. The breakfast sandwich for McDonald's, the Egg McMuffin, was created by a Santa Barbara franchisee. And the apple fritter was created by a Canadian donut franchisee, et cetera. But it's also the point of having a franchise advisory council. They're not a rubber stamp. You really need to use them to kind of inform you as to what the challenges and the issues are and what their recommendations are. So I think communications is critical, and of course that's why great advisors, consultants, and providers such as yourself and your organization come into to play. Turn to the experts. They've been here, done it. You don't have to come up with all of the answers. So I think that's important, and I think inspect what you expect. I think mystery shopping works, and franchisors really don't know, for example, in the franchise sales process, what it actually sounds like to a candidate. So I think these are services that you can do on your own or you can bring them in. The
Sure.
whole point, though, is whatever we do as suppliers and providers is to help franchisors see the truth clearly enough to act on it. And that's what I love about what you're doing with your podcasts, trying to get that truth out there so people can act on it. Because otherwise, the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. So
Absolutely.
I'll end where I began, which is franchisees first, growth follows.
Excellent advice. Keith, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my sincere pleasure, and thank you again for everything that you guys are doing here to make franchising better.
Thanks, Keith.
All right.